Okay, we shall start with your permission then. Partha, are you here?
Yes, Ruchira, we can start. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. A very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruchira, and on behalf of the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, I welcome you all today for joining us for our 6th webinar of Evidence-Based Policy and Action Roundtables. Today's webinar takes forward the discussion we started with our last webinar, that is how identities and our development goals basically interact. And one of the issues that we're constantly facing, and our experts have identified these issues over and over, is that there is a lack of sufficient data, especially when it comes to secondary data for the relevant indicators at the desired scale or at the desired level of disaggregation. So with these issues, let us take the discussion forward. And for that, we are very enthused to have Professor Sonalte Desai with us. Professor Desai is from University of Maryland, USA, and she is basically the PI of the project called India Human Development Survey. She will be orienting you towards this data today. What this data set basically is about, what are the kind of analysis you can take with this data, and also share some of the evidence that she has come across while analyzing the data on the issues of employment and MJ-NREG. Many welcome to Professor Desai in this roundtable series. Before I formally introduce her to the audience present here, let me ask Professor Jyotish Satyapalan, who is the head of School of Rural Livelihood and Infrastructure in IITPR, to formally start this webinar and welcome our speaker today. Professor Jyotish, the mic is over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchira. I'm really glad that you invited me to this webinar, the 6th webinar in this series. And I welcome Dr. Desai to this forum for this presentation on this data and indicators related to Mahatma Gandhi Narega. So I just like to share some of the few things, what we are doing it here. My center is Center for Wage Employment. Last few years, we were engaged in Manrega work. So we are doing this capacity building and research under Manrega. So we got also some opportunity to, gather some of the primary data and also to analyze some of the secondary data. Of course, there are many issues related to this data. And I would like to listen to today's presentation. It will be, I'm sure that it will really educate all of us to go ahead with our capacity building and research project. So with these words, I hand over to Ruchira to conduct these proceedings, and thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jyotish. Let me introduce the speaker to you before I finally hand it over to her and she'll take the session forward. Professor Desai is a demographer whose work deals primarily with social inequalities in developing countries with a particular focus on gender and class inequalities. She is currently based on University of Maryland, but she is also working with the NCIER. She studies inequalities in education, employment, and maternal and child health outcomes by locating them with the region's political economy. While much of her work focuses on South Asia, she has also engaged in comparative studies across Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. She is widely published in a range of sociological and demographic journals, including American Sociological Review, Demography, Population and Development Review, and Feminist Studies. She is a frequent contributor to Indian newspapers. Professor Desai is currently examining changes in the nature and composition of Indian middle classes in the context of India's movement from state capitalism to market capitalism and increasing involvement in global economy. She is the principal investigator for the India Human Development Survey, India's first nationwide panel survey of over 40,000 households. Following the interviews in 2004-05 and 2011-12, the third wave of the IHDS data will be published this year in 2022. With the funding from National Institute of Health, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the UK Department of International Development, this data is publicly available to all researchers and is now being used by more than 11,000 users worldwide. She is jointly holding an appointment with the National Council of Applied Economic Research, that is NCIER, in Delhi, as Professor and Director of National Data Innovation Center, a collaborative enterprise between NCIER, University of Maryland, and the University of Michigan. Professor Desai is also President-elect of the Population Association of America for 2021. Welcome, Professor Sonali Desai, and I would request you to take over the session now and interact with our participants. Thank you. You are muted.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this invitation and an opportunity to interact with colleagues in such a respected institution as NIRD. My goal today is really to orient you with the India Human Development Survey, give you a little bit of results, and sort of, hopefully pick your curiosity to use the data by yourself and have some of your younger colleagues use it. We would also love to have input into the next round of data collection that we will be beginning within about as soon as the pandemic permits. Hopefully we would have gone into field within the next 2 weeks, but now I guess we'll wait until the next wave of Omicron subsides. So let me try and share my slides. Ruchira, tell me, can you see the slides?
Yes, but they are not in a slideshow mode.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is
now
this,
I can see.
yeah, okay. I recognize that a lot of people are probably on phone and not able to see the slides. So, I'll just try to talk things through. I don't intend to present like very complicated statistics, so I can just present some of the data in a more accessible format than having to look at the slides, I hope. So what I wanted to talk about was the reason we started collecting longitudinal data and what are the uses of longitudinal data when it comes to addressing a variety of policy relevant research questions. So what's India Human Development Survey? I'll begin with that. I'll tell you a little bit about sample and data. And then I'll tell you some, illustrating results using the longitudinal data. In India at this point in time, clearly is undergoing vast economic transformation. It's also in some sense a chaotic and inconsistent transformation. And there are many policy innovations which sometimes seem like leaps of faith. So the traditional evaluation programs which rely on before and after data are often not available to us. Okay. Often there is also political and economic diversity. So the programs that work in Kerala might not work somewhere else. Okay. So in some sense, the traditional RCT method of evaluating the policy innovations is not very easily accessible for the kind of policy, say, India undertakes without often a long time lead to prepare some sort of an evaluation plan. So this is where the data set of the kind I'm talking about come in play, because these are sort of regularly collected data that kind of capture policy innovations over time. Okay? So what's our goal? Our goal is in some sense to bear witness to ongoing social and economic transformation, as well as its lack in some areas, measure quality of implementation and evaluate the impact of policy initiatives, and provide data for evidence-based policy design. This data are now available to public, freely downloadable without any cost. It just requires a registration. We have about 11,000 users worldwide who have downloaded the data. About 1,000 papers and theses have been written using these data. Nearly 500 newspapers have referred this data in some form or the other. And it has also been used in policy settings in quite diverse ways. For example, at one point in time when the economic survey came out, I suddenly discovered that, the chapter on basic income was using the IHDS data. We had done a report on Manrega, which was released by the Secretary of Rural Development. It was used pretty widely. Okay. We never even knew that the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare actually read our papers until they sort of started tweeting about it. Okay. So we do think that, yes, it is very much of an academic enterprise, but it has a very strong policy impact. And we are pleased to see that, there are at least ways in which it's being used. And, with all your input, maybe it will be used even more than it has in the past. So what is it? It's an independent data collection. We have an advisory panel that is chaired by Professor Pranav Sen. We have advisors from various statistical agencies, academics, civil society representatives. But we actually try to stay very independent in terms of our research design and data collection, just as an alternative to all the other data sources that India already collects. There are some advantages to being in a non-governmental setting. First, you can make a mistake and there is a lower cost. When NSS experimented with a 30-day and 7-day recall period, it created a lot of confusion. If we make a mistake, people just say, it's NCR data, they make mistakes, it's fine. Okay. It allows us a lot more flexibility in substantive innovations. So for example, at some point in time, we decided that we wanted to have reading and writing outcomes and arithmetic outcomes for children that we wanted to measure. And we just worked with Pratham to add their learning tests. We didn't need approval of these tests. There is also a lot of synergy and learning across surveys, because NCER surveys are the only surveys that actually collect data on income. So we can actually learn quite a bit across different surveys to develop income data collection module that other people don't always have. We can also ask some sensitive questions. And most importantly, we do not have to work with the lowest bidder, okay, which allows us to, in some sense, focus on quality in our data collection rather than necessarily meeting any procurement guidelines. Obviously, we also want to control cost like everybody else, but that doesn't mean we have to work with the lowest bidder if they are not able to deliver a high quality data collection for us. There are also mixed blessings. Okay, for example, we have significant quality monitoring demands because we work with data collection agencies, just like National Family Health Survey works with different agencies. So you have to monitor the quality. We are a small team of people, so there is a real human resource crunch, especially between phases. You have data collection going on in 2004-05 and another in 11-12. Somewhere in between, people move. You have to consistently get more and more funding. We don't, although we design our study for a longitudinal data, we never have money for more than one round of data collection. So it's kind of like a leap of faith that we will be able to keep stable data collection funding going. We also have a lot of bureaucratic hurdles of getting approvals, getting supporting letters, etc., etc. Although we have has helped us navigate many of these hurdles. And the other thing is that sometimes we think of ideas that we would love to do, and then we say, okay, no, you don't have time to do it. You can't do everything and you can't have everything included. I always wanted to collect data on water quality before the Swachh Bharat was implemented and after. I wish we had been able to do it, but we simply couldn't handle getting water quality data tested. So, we sometimes come up with very interesting, innovative ideas, and then we just say, okay, well, we are only a small team of people and there is only so much we can do. So those are some of the pluses and minuses of collecting data through non-governmental systems. First question, though, one would want to ask is, why one more survey? After all, India is home to some of the largest data collection efforts. Our censuses are gigantic in size. We have annual national sample surveys and National Family Health Survey. There was a point at time when there were annual health survey and district level health surveys. So what we decided was that for us, we just wanted to get a niche that is very different from many of these surveys. There are two issues that are relevant. One, that many of these other surveys are cross-sectionals. That means that they did interview different households at different point in time. Okay, you can compare society in 2000 and 2010, but you cannot compare the same household in 2000 and 2010 using some of these other surveys like NSS. Also, they are often single focus surveys. So you cannot easily link what's happening in the employment domain with what's happening in the health domain. Okay? And of course, they are all funded by government and subject to control in terms of accessibility kind of questions that can be asked and so on. Which is again not a bad thing. It's just that there is a opportunity for innovation might be a little more limited. So what we thought of was that IHDS was designed to have a unique niche. It has a multi-purpose survey. Okay, it allows us to sort of link different types of household experiences. Also links it with some of the institutional facilities and services like schools and medical facilities in the area. Okay. It also, NCR hallmark is that we collect data on income, which nobody else does, and that has some fairly interesting implications that I will show you in a few minutes. The other issue is that there is a real need for longitudinal surveys. You know, for example, many of you have used ICRISAT data probably. ICRISAT data actually has more papers written out of it than the sample size, just because it's such a unique data. There are just not very many longitudinal data sets available. Longitudinal data is needed to answer many questions. Okay, so for example, whose maternal care was affected by introduction of Janani Suraksha Yojana and other maternity schemes? Should policies be focusing on poverty alleviation or insurance against some of the life events? Do children who fall behind in primary school stay behind, or do they catch up at some point in time? Okay. So there are a lot of questions that longitudinal data can answer, which cross-sectional data cannot very easily answer. To go to a little bit about India Human Development Survey and its sample. It covers 33 states and union territories. And now, you know, with introduction of Telangana, we also add Telangana in. We do not have data from Ladakh, Lakshadweep, or Andaman Nicobar. So those are kind of excluded from our sample. It's spread across about 1,500 villages and 971 urban blocks, 40,000 households, which is over 2 lakh individuals. 33,000 ever married women were interviewed, and about 12,000 kids of age 8 to 11 were given reading, writing, arithmetic tests. We also collected village schedule data for about 1,400 villages, where basically we get data on village infrastructure facilities, village in and out migration, nearby industries, and so on. We collected data for each PSU on one private and one public health facility and primary school. So you can do some linkages of institutional structures in an area to sort of individual outcomes. The original survey was done in 2004-05. The next wave of survey was done in 2011-12, which pretty much had the same kind of a sample structure. We tried to go back to the same households, okay? And what we found was that we were able to recontact about 83% of the households which we had originally surveyed. We also included some of the new members of the original households, newly born children, newly married in wives, etc. in our analysis. In urban areas, we were concerned about higher level of attrition, you know, us not being able to find our old households. So we added a sample of about 2,000 additional households for urban areas. Rural areas, our recontact rate was over 90%, so we didn't need to add additional households. However, we did lose of our original 2,15,000 households. We were not able to get any data on about 31,000 individuals because they just were lost because we just couldn't find those households. There were about 25,000 migrants who had moved out of the area and somewhere else, and we got some proxy information about them, but we couldn't get detailed information on their life. And about 8,000 individuals from the original household had died, and we collected some information on their causes of death and what circumstances around their death. When we go into the next wave of data collection, we will follow the same structure, where we will interview all our original households, all the splits from those households which live in the same locality. If a household has migrated out of that locality, we will do interviews by telephone. So the new innovation is going to be essentially a phone survey of migrants. We do not know how successful we will be in able to get phone information and carry out phone interviews, but at least we are determined to try, given particularly some of the crisis around migration during the COVID period. It seems like really a worthwhile thing for us to collect data on migrants. As I said, we were able to contact 83% after 7 years. Now we are going after about 10 years. So I don't know how many, what would be our attrition rate, but we will do our best to try to minimize it. On the whole, people who have done use the data from IHDS have found it to be of pretty good quality. I think all of us who collect data know how vulnerable we are to measurement errors, to various types of non-sampling errors. Your interviewers may cheat, your respondents may not understand your questions. These data errors is something we all learn to live with. But within the bounds of normal data errors, overall, I think IHDS data are pretty comparable in terms of other benchmark statistics, and we feel reasonably pleased with it. You can never guarantee that next round of data collection is going to be of good quality. We all know the challenges pretty much all data collection organizations face. And all I can do is promise you that we'll do our best to minimize it as best as it's possible. So let me tell you a little bit about the kind of longitudinal analysis which has been done. Okay. So for example, we have repeated cross sections in the same area. So we know that people in wave 1 and wave 2 are living in the same villages, and they experience the same kind of external surroundings. So we can look at the introduction of Janni Suraksha Yojana and see who were the most who found it most beneficial, controlling for the location and geography. Okay? And we actually found that it was most beneficial to people from the lowest socioeconomic strata. So that's something very positive to see. Other thing we do is we talk about, we can look at changes in economy and who benefits and who loses. And here I'm actually going to present to you some more actual results on poverty dynamics, so I won't talk about it. Second thing is what happens when policy climate changes? Does it affect sort of households' behavior and household response? And we actually found that increased availability of public distribution system ended up skewing diets towards sort of cereals and away from some diversity of diet. And it's for the same households, the households which had access to BPL cards and ration cards were actually more likely to consume rice and wheat and focus on getting cheap calories rather than investing in some of the more diversified diet. So that would be something that PDS system should take into account, something we have been thinking about. The other thing we have looked at is what happens when you have life experiences at some critical stages and how do they affect subsequent trajectories. For example, if the children are falling behind in early learning, do they ever catch up? And our results actually suggest that children who were behind in basic reading and math skills at age 8 to 11, some of them managed to catch up when they became teenagers, whereas some of them didn't. And the children who were able to catch up are the ones who came from middle-class households. So, middle-class parents, when they see their children falling behind, will get tutoring, will get put in extra resources and help children catch up. It's the poor children who are falling behind early on who kind of get left behind. So the policy implications would be that we should be focusing on some of the intensive interventions at very early rather than at a later age if we care about inequalities. Similarly, poor health affects earning capacity and economic status affects health. How do we sort this out? And what we find is that basically, although diseases like diabetes, heart trouble, etc., affects many people from many walks of life, it's the people who have financial resources who are able to gain treatment for these diseases and are less likely to die. Whereas people who do not have financial resources are more likely to die, given the same kind of health conditions. So these are some of the longitudinal analysis that we have undertaken using IHDS data. Let me deep dive into a couple of results. Okay. For this group, clearly the social safety nets are of interest. India's social safety nets policies have generally relied on identifying the poor through some sort of a BPL card or BPL identification, and then providing benefits to people who are identified as poor. The problem is that we can only do the BPL census every 10 years, okay, and BPL identification every 10 years. And saying that somebody who was poor in 2000 will remain poor in 2010, or someone who was poor in 2010 will remain poor through 2018, 19, 20, may be not always accurate within an era where either economic growth is taking place or actually now in an era of pandemic where sudden economic shock might be affecting and making a lot of households vulnerable. So having longitudinal data allows us to at least understand to what extent poor households get out of poverty and people who are not poor fall into poverty. And analysis of this one basically tells us that India's poverty and the face of the poor has been changing over time. So in 2005, our data showed that 38% of the households were poor, 62% were not poor, which is very similar to what the NSS data was showing at that point in time. However, what we found was that of the poor, 25%, 38% were poor to begin with in 2005. Of that, 25% were not poor in 2012, whereas about 13% remained poor in 2012. Of the 62% who were not poor, 9% became poor and 53% remained non-poor. So if we are looking at the people who are poor in 2012, of that, about 2/3 were traditional poor and 1/3 was the new poor. Okay. What it suggests is that if BPL cards were issued in 2005, based on 2005 poverty status, we would miss about 40% of the poor who were in 2012. Okay? And what it would do is it would also misdirect funds to the 25% that moved out of poverty. So we have both sides, errors of both sides. People who become poor are missed out, and people who move out of poverty continue to get benefits. So in some sense, identification becomes a major issue. Using the kind of BPL targeting programs that we use, you can deal with accidents of birth, people who are born poor, okay, people who come from poor areas, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and so on. And those are the accidents of birth that we can identify and provide subsidies for. People who become poor due to accident of life, some earning household member gets sick and dies. There is a crop loss or crop failure. There are some other accidents. you are working in an industry which suddenly becomes less important, and people start losing jobs. Okay, those accidents of life are difficult to identify a priori and provide subsidy programs for that a priori. And we may need different kinds of targeting mechanisms for accident of life. Okay. This is where programs like MGNREGA come in. Okay. Now, if what I'm showing here is a graph to you, which shows proportion of individuals in various income quintiles who are participating in MGNREGA. But the income quintile that I'm using is not current income quintile. The income quintile that I'm using is from a prior wave of survey. So it kind of tells you that if people at a different economic status ladders, what percentage are using or participating in MGNREGA program. And what we find is that for the first, the bottom 4 quintiles, or bottom 80% of the sample, okay, there is not that great a difference between who participates in MGNREGA. There is some slight decline with income, but not a huge one. Okay? It's only the richest where there is a sharp decline in percentages participating in NREGA. And I think part of it is because that people, although they might have been in the second quintile or third quintile in a prior way of survey, they might have experienced some of the, what I'd like to call the accident of life that sort of brought them down into poverty or vulnerability, where NREGA became very attractive for them to participate in. So universal programs that are of natural targeting, the kind that NREGA is, allows for people who accidentally experience any kind of an accident of life. And this is my last slide, and I'm going to stop here.
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you for the presentation. I see some kind of a prompt in your screen, I believe.
Yeah, my screen seems to show that.
Yeah, no issues.
Yeah, it's ending. Let me stop sharing. So,
yeah, so we have a lot of participants who have joined here today from different backgrounds. We have some people who are into research and who use IHG's data for their research. We also have government functionaries who are working in their respective departments, working on annual planning, and they have to monitor their programs and so on. So I'm sure there will be a lot of questions to Sonal here, and I would like to open the floor to my audience. They can either raise their hand and we will take the question by one, or they can unmute themselves and straight away ask the question. The floor is now open for discussion.
I am having a little bit of a trouble seeing the screen. So if somebody is raising their hands, will you please call on them, Ruchira?
Yes, sure. I'll moderate. You can either raise your hand or also drop your question to chat box, in which case I'll read it out.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah, Dr. Lakhan, please.
Yeah, I am Dr. Lakhan Singh. I am faculty in National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for orienting us about the Indian Human Development Survey. I have been involved in National Family Health Survey in 3 rounds earlier. But really, I was not having idea about this particular data set, which provides an ample scope for a researcher like us. So my straight question to you is, because I have not seen the data set of ICDS, but I want to know from you, is there any question apart from MGNREGA, the programs of rural development or the Panchayati Raj, the programs, the direct
So
questions on these programs. Is there?
yes, we have two kinds of questions. One is whether people received any benefit from various kinds of programs like housing schemes, maternity benefit schemes, and so on. So at the household level, did you receive any benefit? Second is whether you are participating in schemes such as crop insurance and Kisan credit card and so on. And then there is sort of a village module which contains information on operation of various schemes in the area.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
I'm Dr. Murugan from Center for Development Studies. Madam, I would like to have two clarifications. That's all. One is the income data which we are collecting. It's of course to what extent it is error-free, because generally I have some experience in the NSSO and some experience in other surveys and some experience in the state surveys also, where I worked for a long period. Generally, when we ask for the income data, how do you check ensure its quality? Is there any cross check in the schedule? Oh, sorry, I don't remember. In fact, I have seen your first schedule and the second schedule too. But what sort of checking you can make? That is one question. And the second thing is regarding water quality. See, nowadays there is extensive machinery that is available for water quality measurement. So, what are the major criteria that you use? Ensuring quality of water is a very tricky thing, and even in the bottled water, you cannot say that it is completely free. That's what we could find in from the market. Many other surveys. That is another problem. And the third thing which I would like to point out is to what is the sort of you are connecting to the one panel, that is the 2000 data with that of 2005-6, and again telling that some portion is error free, some people are there. How far it is acceptable? That is my hunch, and that is one thing. Second thing, how do you adjust for the price? Are you adjusting for the prices also, or what is the rationale here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So clearly you have been collecting data. So these are very pertinent questions coming from experience. I think we all know that collecting data on income is very difficult. Actually, collecting data on most things is quite difficult, but income is particularly sensitive. So one of the things that we have done is we actually collect data on income in a sort of a manner in which you are capturing income from different sources. So for example, we would ask, do you have a farm? What did you grow last year? What was the produce? How much of it was sold? How much of it was kept for home consumption? What were the input costs and so on? So sort of some of the similar to cost of cultivation surveys kind of analysis. For wage work, we would find out, what kind of work individuals were doing, different individuals within the household, and what were the wages that they received. For animal husbandry, we would like ask questions by, how many animals did you kept, how many cows, buffaloes, goats, etc. What were the feed costs, what were the veterinary costs, how much of it were you able to sell, milk sale, etc. So we try to do a fairly reasonably detailed set of questions. Having said that, nobody in their right mind will tell you that we get perfect data on income. Okay, we don't. Okay. What we can do, however, is that we also collect data on some of the basic consumption expenditure modules that NSSO uses, its short module. We also collect data like NFHS on the kind of assets that households own. So you can triangulate households' economic status using this variety of diverse sources, including housing quality, access to toilet, and so on. On the waterfront, what I really wanted to do, and we didn't do it, okay, obviously, what I wanted to do was to do a test of fecal coliform. Basically, just take the water sample and get it tested, okay? And we didn't do it, okay? Just because the managing it was all turning out to be difficult. As far as prices are concerned, we have done, CPI adjustment using some of the price data very similar to the way NSSO does. And that's what we have done so far, and hopefully we can do it next round as well. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Yeah, but still, I'm not taking much of your time, but despite that, I'm sorry. The problem is that what is the see, we cannot say that otherwise we are giving a sort of a notion to the policymakers so that look, our data is like this. So what is this policy behavior? It's partly erroneous. That is the problem it makes.
I know.
We can't say that it is fully correct.
No,
It is
can't.
and by and large, income data is underreported in many cases. They will not reveal you what is the sort of income. This has happened right from the 28th, 30th round of NSSO until the current round. So it's happening like that. And nothing. That is one of the reasons why I think, if I remember correctly, NSSO was earlier collecting it and later on discontinued. And in some places, NSSO, they themselves made some trial, but they couldn't achieve fully. So if some corrective mechanisms also, or something like that, which you have said is totally correct. I agree, fully agree. But still, this is only cross checks. These are only cross checks on averages, average incomes.
I agree. I do not believe that you can income data inherently contain flaws. Nonetheless, though, I would also submit that so does consumption data, and consumption, in fact, also has some deficiencies which income can help solve. So, take an example. During the COVID period, okay, so many families are going to have vastly overstated health expenditure, hospitalization expenditure, many other sources of expenditure that would occur, which is not really something that puts them into a high consumption. They're not rich people. Okay, you could be very poor and have a very high health expenditure, and that will put you into sort of out of the poverty basket. Okay, so in some sense, I think that errors exist in pretty much all sets of economic status. Okay, and income provides you with a different snapshot of what's going on in the society. Consumption provides you with a different snapshot, and I think we just need to triangulate between the two.
Thank you, Dr. Sonal. I think there are so many questions in the chat box. I'd like to catch up.
Thanks.
And if you want to continue the discussion, of course, at a later stage, you can do it. I see Professor Jyotish has raised his hand. Sir, can you unmute yourself and ask? Professor Jyotish?
Yes, I think, yeah. Yeah, I think I'm audible, right? My question is, MNREGA is a program for unskilled manual labor. And what is the definition in your survey for participation? Is it in terms of the number of employment they got it? Or just asking whether you got at least one time gone to the MNREGA work? What is your operational definition in the survey? That's one question. Then the second one is on the income. It is meant for the unskilled manual labor, mostly landless laborers and all. So there is a higher chance everybody is in the bottom level, So that is the one thing I want to mention. It's a comment, basically. So that's all about it. Thank you.
I think these are good points. what we do is we ask whether over the past year, anybody in your household participated in Manrega. And for each individual, we get a list of activities that they have done over the last year and how many days they worked in it, and whether these work activities were in Manrega, they were in other public works, in sort of agricultural labor, salaried work, and so on. So our definition is very much participation and amount of participation. You are very right that Manrega is designed to be for the unskilled workers. And that was one of the reasons we were a little bit surprised to see Manrega participation being higher even among the sort of a slightly higher income groups. And I think that it's because some of these groups which had high, it's sort of like somebody who quite a few Manrega workers actually are also small and marginal farmers. Okay. At one point in time.
Absolutely, you are right. Actually, there are many skilled workers and small and marginal farmers are also coming, and there is incentive today. The category B asset is provided to them. So it's important to have a job card if you wanted to have this category B. Otherwise, you will not get it, So there is an incentive to come forward and take such works. So I think your finding is correct. That's what we also found in some of our exercise here in India. Thank you.
Hello?
Yeah.
Sir, I think Manrega is intended to give employment opportunities for the landless agricultural laborers in the agricultural lean period to compensate them to have the employment opportunities throughout the year.
No, it's not like that.
Manrega to above poverty level persons.
Mr. Nagar,
I think I would like to comment on that point. Manrega is a kind of, anybody, if after my retirement, I can go for Manrega work. Nobody can stop. So that is it. It's not targeting anybody. It is a self-targeted program that is very clear in the preamble of the Act itself.
Sir, I just want to give you an anecdote here. We actually made roughly about 30,000 calls to households when we were checking our data. And there was this one case in which there was a school teacher and his wife was working in Narega. And one of my colleagues absolutely did not believe it. He said that, this interviewer must have made a mistake or made up the data. So we actually were both sitting together making this phone call. And it turns out that she actually was working in Manrega.
That's what I said. Even after retirement, I can go. Nobody can stop. It's a self-targeted program.
And there is one anecdote from me as well. So I was working with the Palanpur data before this, which is village study, and there are a lot of mixed method quantitative. And what we basically observe in the village data is that for women, especially in North India, MGNREGA is actually attractive because it has some tag of government.
I have an estimate here. Nearly 11% of Manrega workers are skilled workers.
Yes,
they are
yes. And also for women, it's desirable. I mean, private is not even part of the imagination, but when you talk about Manrega, it's still a government job, and there is a the income will come, and women basically participate. So that might also show why in some higher income category you see such a high percentage. Yes. So there are more questions, and there are a few questions in the chat box. If I have your permission, I'll read them out. I think if I go back a little high up, the first is from Bijit. He is asking that he wants to collect information from, he wants to sample the population, and he's asking for some tips how to make a sample representatives, if there are any tips from Professor Sonalde on this.
Would you like to send me an email? I just was working recently with people in Niti Aayog DMEO, and they were putting together a very nice document on sampling design. So if you send me an email, I'll be very happy to share it with you.
Okay, so Bijit, I hope you have heard that. I will be sharing Professor Desai's email with everyone, and if you want to connect with her for some work in your area, you can send her an email and start the
Ma'am,
dialogue.
I have a question. I have a question to add. How far your study? You have done a study, and could you please tell me how far your sample population is representative? Because sample population, if unless and otherwise is representative, the result will not be close to the real. I wish to. What are the precautions you have taken?
We tried to design it as a representative sample. Initial sampling was done as a stratified random sampling, where we selected, representative districts out of cluster of economically similar districts. Then we randomly selected villages from a list which was set up in such a way that it was in one tehsil we were going down by female education, and in another tehsil we were going up by female education, so that you can get sort of a reasonably random sample. Urban areas were sampled using probability proportional to the size PPS sampling method. So we tried hard to be representative as far as the baseline study was concerned. Okay, and we have done comparison of our baseline sample with other studies like NSS, Census, NFHS, and again we have a document which I am happy to share, which shows that it's broadly representative on a variety of domains. The challenge comes when you are doing a longitudinal study and where you are losing out some of the households because you can't interview them again. So, for example, households from railway colony will move. Okay, I mean, you get transferred and you move. Okay, so what you need to do at that point in time, if you want to keep it cross-sectionally representative, you have to augment the sample. And we have done some sort of analysis with respect to how to augment the sample so that it remains cross-sectionally representative. But for all panel studies, as panels get older, staying cross-sectionally representative becomes a bit of a challenge. And you're trading off your longitudinal access with some missing cross-sectional representativeness. So for example, now that while we are designing the third wave of the sample, we decided that we will augment our sample both in urban and rural areas, because some of the rural attrition may be very selective of people who have migrated out. We are also going to be surveying the migrants via telephone so that we can at least do some sample selectivity adjustment.
Thank you, Sonal. Before I read out the next question from chat box, I think I saw Dr. Anita Brandon raising her hand. Dr. Brandon, if you have a question, can you please unmute yourself? Okay, we can maybe come back to her later. So the next question is from Shanmita. She's asking that, does IHD's data collection stage ever face data fatigue on the ground, and how are you going to address it?
Interestingly, no, we do not face data fatigue on the ground. Okay, we face interviewer fatigue. We don't face respondent fatigue because we are going to them frequently. It's actually a lot of fun, and I do a lot of, not a lot of interviews, but I do a fair number of interviews myself as well. And what happens is that when you are taking their prior household information with you, okay, they sort of feel a sense of your respondents have a greater faith in you and greater connection. So we would say, last time we came, your household had, Ruchira and Vijit. And so where is Ruchira now? And where is Vijit now? Okay, and that helps. The other thing we have done is we have annually sent them a greeting card at New Year with a little calendar. Okay, and our interviewers will also remind them that we used to send you greeting cards and you probably have them. And at one point in time, actually, we went back for some pre-testing and we found our old greeting card hanging on somebody's wall. Okay, so would I say that people are delighted to answer this multitude of questions? They're not. Okay, I mean, people do get bored, but there is also a sense in which we actually do better than if you were doing a fresh survey. Okay, because there is some sort of a connection from the past. Tiredness is definitely a problem. We do have to train our interviewers that you may need to make several visits, and we have to sort of plan for it, budget for it, allow them enough time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal. So, Dr. Brandon, I think probably has unmuted herself, but I still can't hear her. Maybe a network issue.
Yeah. Am I audible now, Ruchira?
Yeah, you're audible now. Yeah, please.
Yes. So, Professor Desai, I have 2-3 questions, short ones. One, basically, that your Indian Human Development Survey, does it in any way link up with the Human Development Report that is brought out every year by UNDP, and also with Niti Aayog in feeding them data for human development statistics state-wise, because it's a comprehensive survey across Indian states? That's one. And my second issue is that are you ensuring gender disaggregated data to also keep a tab on how gender inequality is moving up or down? And my third issue is to the NIRD fraternity as well. And that is about, like Dr. Desai has mentioned, that IHDS survey initially was after 2005 and 2012, and now they are considering a 10-year gap. Similarly, the BPL surveys have been happening every 5 or 10 years. NFHS also likewise. Now I want to focus your attention, which a point I have been raising time and again before MOPR also. You are aware that we have this Mission Antyodaya survey, which started some years back, and they are doing it as an annual exercise. It started with some 40 plus questions, but now has expanded to consider 140 plus questions. And it is a village-based survey all across pan-Indian size and being done every year. Is it really worthwhile, and are trends changing every year that you have to do a massive survey exercise every year to be able to score and rank panchayats across the country? How useful is it? Or why not we focus our energies and attention on the People's Plan campaign for planning and coming up with panchayat development plans, basing the baseline data of year one, say, and doing 5-yearly surveys in tandem with PRI election tenure, rather than doing an annual survey, Mission Antyodaya survey every year? So these are 3 questions. Thank you.
So, Professor Brandon, the work we are doing is not related at all to the UNDP Human Development Report. I personally don't believe in ranking states. I would have a very hard time creating these indices, mostly because, some states do well on some things, not so much on the other. Are we comparing averages? Are we comparing extremes? So I honestly just back out of the ranking exercise. In fact, I recently wrote a newspaper article criticizing some of these indices. So totally disassociating from any kind of sort of compare states with each other, compare panchayats with each other, and so on. I guess my goal is really to try and understand the processes of what is happening in our society and how public policy might be able to change those processes. And that brings me to your third question: do we need annual data? Look, at one point in time, I remember Ministry of Rural Development actually talked to us about, would you do, they had liked the NREGA report we did, and they said, would you do annual survey? And I just couldn't stop smiling. I said that I don't think we have the capacity to do it. Okay. Frankly, we just want to do a good job, and we are unable to keep doing a good job if we just get into this rut of collecting data every year. Moreover, things that we want to look at sort of long-term trends, not the year-to-year trends. So for us, it makes sense to study a child at age 8 and 18. What happened to them at age 18? To what extent was it related to what they experienced at age 8, rather than from 8 to 9? But for some questions, maybe that is annual data is irrelevant. Okay. So I think on the gender part, Actually, I have a very strong interest personally in studying evolution of gender norms and gender relations in our society. And so we collect gender disaggregated data in two ways. One, we collect data on each household member. So there is a sort of a gendered information on employment, income, and so on for each person, healthcare usage for each person. So you can do a sort of gender disaggregated analysis. But the second part of it is actually we collect quite interesting data on gender norms in the family and household division of responsibilities. So for example, we actually have collected, when we'll be collecting more data on who in the household owns the land, whose name is on the land title. So if you wanted to do some sort of gender disaggregated analysis of land ownership, this data could be useful. We also ask for source from which this land was acquired, inherited by the woman member, inherited by the male member, and so on. We also ask questions about who is the primary decision maker for household agricultural activities in your household, for household business, and so on. So yes, I think we have made great efforts at making this data that is very useful for people who have an interest in gender. I'm sure there are things we are missing, but we have tried very hard.
I would
Thank
like
you
to
so
share,
much.
I'm having this report of yours, the India report on gender inequality and demographic behavior of 1994, ICPD.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Brandon, for bringing up the issue of gender, and thank you, Dr. Sonal, for addressing that. I see that in the chat box there are no more questions and no more raised hands also. So I'll take the opportunity to ask one question that I wanted to ask regarding the data, and that is about the disaggregation. So I know it's nationally representative, but till what level can we really disaggregate? Like, what are the subsets that we can study from it? That's really something that we've been trying to.
Okay, so I get this question a lot because people want state level estimates. Okay, and my answer is that we never designed it to be state level representative, but for the states for which there is a sample that is sufficiently large, so some of the major states like Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, etc., you actually have data that can be used at the state level, okay, which can be useful. Now, that said, I will not make a claim that it is state level representative and certainly not district level representative. Okay, I mean, at that level, it's basically more of an analytical exercise. So for your multivariate analysis, yes, you can use district level characteristics and so on, but you can't use the data to build your district level estimates.
Dr. Partha, do you have a question?
Yeah. Recently I was reading this Anirudh Krishna paper where they talked about how X% of families lifted from below the poverty line in Kenyan villages and also Rajasthan villages and like that. I think similar analysis you may have attempted in your data set. So I just want to request you to reflect. So what are the key driving factors the family, because of which family were lifted from below the poverty line to above the poverty line? What are the barriers which put them back, or the new poor that we are now talking about? If you can reflect on that. Second, are you going to canvas some new questionnaire or new questions in the new survey that you are planning to do to capture this whole the humanitarian crisis because of this COVID pandemic and pandemic-led lockdown?
So both very interesting questions. The first one is that I think there are two things that lift people out of poverty. Okay, one is all boats rise when both the country and the area in which they live are doing better. Okay, So some of it is that it's not individual specific. It's just that X percentage of people will get out of poverty as overall incomes are rising. It happens much more in areas which are sort of doing better. So for example, one of the things that we found was that building of road connectivity, okay, was something that lifted people out of poverty in particular areas. Okay, so improved connectivity, improved transportation, and so on. At the individual level, certainly there are things like higher education, which allows people to be lifted out of poverty. In terms of falling back into the poverty, okay, there are several things which are relevant. One is that there are some occupations in which you fall back into poverty more easily. You're a government servant. The COVID is not going to affect you. You're going to be paid regardless of whether there is a lockdown or not. But you are a street vendor. You are going to lose money because you can't sell. Especially if you're selling non-essential items or non-food items. So in some sense, there are occupational factors which often drop people into poverty, occupational factors which also lift you out of poverty. So particularly working for government sector. Okay. And then, of course, there are individual level health crisis, which again is a major push for pushing people into poverty. And that kind of brings us to the current COVID and pandemic related crisis. We actually we would have been in the field last year, but for the pandemic. So we had this extra year in which we ended up adding a number of questions surrounding pandemic into our data collection. Some of it is just whether there was the health impact within this particular household of the pandemic related health crisis. Second is educational impact on children during the lockdown. And third is the economic impact on the household in terms of whether somebody in your family lost a job, was not able to work, whether some business closed and things of that type. And I guess the final question we had was whether they received some of the pandemic related relief measures. Who got the PM Kisan distribution, who got Jan Dhan distribution, and so on. The problem is that the pandemic is moving so fast and changing so rapidly that everything I designed last year is already sort of old. And you sort of think, okay, well, were these the right questions or not? We live in a strange world.
Partha, if you have no more question, there is another question in chat box I would like to read out.
Yeah, yes, please.
Okay. So Sharad is asking that what are the precautions that we need to take while collecting accidental data? By accidental data, he means if people have lost jobs or lost a bread earner, what should we ask, or what are the cautions that we can take?
I guess I'm having a little harder time understanding these questions. I can see two dimensions to the question. One is, how do you collect data on some of these accidental misfortunes? And the second one that actually concerns me even more is, how do we deal with humanitarian crisis when you are sort of interviewing people who are in distress? Okay. The first one is actually relatively easier. Okay. Which is essentially what we are doing is we go year by year and we sort of ask people questions, have you experienced over the last 10 years, did you experience any death in your family? If yes, what were the years? And often we actually have linked to the individuals from the past, so we can kind of link it in, okay? Crop loss, drought, etc., etc. Okay, those are actually relatively simpler questions for simple misfortunes. When it is unexpected misfortunes that can't be captured within your structured questionnaire, we have a sort of other specify box. I don't know how that is going to work out. I mean, we have usually not had good luck with unstructured questions in large surveys. How do you deal with the humanitarian crisis is really, really difficult. Okay. And I personally find it very difficult because at one point I remember doing an interview where we were asking about the woman we had interviewed in the past had actually died by committing suicide. Okay. And it was a very sensitive topic for the family. Okay. It was a very difficult thing to handle. And I think we try our best to train our interviewers to be reasonably sensitive and understanding and sympathetic. I mean, this is something we spent, a special training session on. That said, honestly, however sympathetic I try to be, I find it very difficult to handle myself. And I'm sure so do my respondents. It's just, we're dealing with hard human facts.
Thank you, Sonal. I don't think there are a bunch of thank you and thank you for the reply. There are no questions as such. Okay, so if there are no other questions and no other comments, I think we can wind up the session today. Professor Jyotish, would you like to make some concluding observations before we formally close the session?
Yeah, I found it extremely, a good learning on this new database, which I was not much aware of this database before. Just now, I just browsed your website. Also, I found it's quite exciting one. I think it is useful for an NAIDPR work. Many, working papers and publications are there. I think the participants can go and have a look into this one. I found it quite exciting, this one. And the point that you made on MGNREGS at the end, it's very important. And I found there are many people moving towards the higher income group and also small marginal farmers. They are also moving towards NREGA. Actually, NREGA is a last resort for the poorest of the poor. But now this is a safety net for a little bit better off people also. That is a major concern. On the other side, we are all thinking of an exit policy for NREGA. But if this is the trend, there's no more exit from NREGA. Still, we are going to that trap of poverty. That's not very good. And this was an excellent lecture, and really thankful to Dr. Desai for this one. On behalf of the DG and NAIDPR and NAIDPR or faculty, I express our sincere thanks to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Jyotish. And I believe since there are no questions, yes.
Let me just end by thanking the participants because these were great questions and it was a fun conversation. So thank you. And one of the things I do is try to sort of encourage more users for the data set. So I hope,
I'm
some
sure
of your colleagues, your students would be interested. Thank you.
Sure. And I'm sure you're going to get quite a few emails after the session today, and hopefully some productive ones. And of course, from NAIDPR itself, we are going to contact you soon with possibilities of more research using your data and getting some of the policy insights that we are trying to do through the webinar series as well. So on behalf of NAIDPR and on behalf of our participants, I really thank you for your time, for patiently engaging with us, taking our questions, clearing our doubts, and hopefully we will have many more such sessions in the future with you as well. And maybe our participants will be oriented with the data better and will be able to come up with more questions and ideas. So thank you, and thank you everyone for joining, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Close kar do. Ruchira, we are closing the meeting.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. See you. Bye.